The storm hit Wyoming like a fist. Wind tore across the open plains, ripping through sagebrush and frozen grass, carrying snow so thick it turned the world into a wall of white. The kind of storm that buried livestock, snapped fence posts, and swallowed travelers whole. Rhett Carver rode through it anyway. He pulled his coat tighter, squinting against the ice pelting his face. His horse moved slowly and careful, each step deliberate on the uneven ground. Rhett wasn't out here for pleasure. A section of fence had come down near the creek, and if he didn't check it now, come morning he'd be chasing half his herd across the county. The frozen creek appeared through the haze, a dark line cutting through white. Rhett guided his horse closer, eyes scanning for the break in the wire. Then lightning split the sky. For one sharp, blinding second, the world lit up like daylight. And Rhett saw something that didn't belong. A shape. Half buried in snow near the creek bed. Dark fabric torn and flapping in the wind. At first, he thought it was debris, canvas blown off a wagon, maybe, or an old tarp ripped loose from someone's camp. Then the shape moved. Just barely. A twitch. Small and weak. Rhett's chest went tight. He swung down from his horse, boots crunching through the snowdrift, and dropped to his knees beside the shape. His gloved hands pulled back the torn canvas sheet. 2 children lay underneath. The older one, a girl, maybe 9, had her arms wrapped around a baby. She was curled tight against the cold, her face pale as ash, lips tinged blue. Her eyes were open, staring up at him with a hollow, distant look that hit Rhett harder than the wind. The baby in her arms wasn't moving. Rhett's heart slammed against his ribs. He pressed 2 fingers to the infant's neck, feeling for a pulse. There. Faint, but there. The girl's lips moved. No sound came out, but her eyes locked onto his, wide and terrified. "I've got you," Rhett said, his voice rough. "Both of you." He didn't wait. "I didn't think so." He scooped the girl into one arm and cradled the baby against his chest with the other. They weighed almost nothing, too light, too fragile. The girl's arms stayed wrapped around her brother even as Rhett lifted them, as if letting go meant losing him forever. The storm roared louder, wind howling like something alive and angry. Snow lashed at Rhett's back as he stumbled toward his horse. He climbed into the saddle one-handed, holding the children close, and turned the animal toward home. The ride back was a blur of white and cold. Rhett kept his head down, one arm locked around the children, feeling their shallow breaths against his coat. The girl didn't speak. Didn't cry. She just held on. When the cabin finally appeared through the storm, Rhett nearly collapsed with relief. He kicked the door open and staggered inside, lowering the children onto the floor near the hearth. The fire had burned down to embers. Rhett threw wood onto it, stoking it hard until flames leapt high and hot. He pulled blankets from the bed and wrapped them around the children, layer after layer, then filled a pot with water and set it over the fire. Broth. They'd need something warm inside them. The girl's eyes followed his every movement. She didn't blink. I didn't relax. Just watched him like she was waiting for something terrible to happen. Rhett knelt beside her, his voice low and steady. "You're safe now," he said. But the look in her eyes told him she didn't believe that. Not yet. The cabin filled with warmth, but the children stayed cold. Rhett knelt beside them, spooning broth carefully into the girl's mouth. She took it in small sips, her hands shaking as they gripped the blanket tighter. The baby, barely more than a year old, whimpered softly, his face pressed against his sister's shoulder. "What's your name?" Rhett asked gently. The girl's eyes flicked to his face, then away. Her voice came out thin and hoarse. "Mara." "And him?" "Jonah." Rhett nodded. He dipped the spoon again, brought it to her lips. She took another sip, then pulled back, her gaze darting toward the door. "No one's coming," Rhett said quietly. Just us here. Mara didn't answer. But her grip on Jonah tightened. Rhett had seen fear before, plenty of it. Fear of storms, of wild animals, of men with guns. But this was different. This was the kind of fear that lived deep, the kind that didn't leave when the danger passed. He stood and moved to the stove, ladling more broth into a bowl. As he turned back, Mara flinched, her whole body going rigid. Rhett froze mid-step. Easy, he said softly. Just bringing you more. She watched him approach like a trapped animal watching a predator. Only when he set the bowl down and stepped back did her shoulders lower slightly. Rhett had lived alone for years. He'd chosen it. After everything that happened before, after the war, after the ranch he tried to build with his brother burned to nothing, after being left behind more times than he cared to count, solitude felt safer than trust. His cabin reflected that choice. One chair. One plate. One cup. No decorations. No softness. Just the essentials for a man who didn't expect company and didn't want it. But now, looking at these two children wrapped in blankets by his fire, something old and buried stirred in his chest. Something that felt uncomfortably like responsibility. Over the next 2 days, Mara stayed silent and less spoken to. She ate what Rhett gave her, held Jonah close, and never let her guard down. At night, she jolted awake at the smallest sound, a log shifting in the fire, wind rattling the shutters, the creak of floorboards as Rhett moved through the cabin. She always looked at the door first. Rhett started keeping the lamps turned low. It seemed to help. On the third morning, while Mara fed Jonah small pieces of bread soaked in milk, Rhett sat across from them at the table. "How'd you end up out there?" he asked. Mara's hand still. She didn't look up. "A man," she said finally. "He said he'd take us west. Said there was work. A place for us." "What man?" "Don't know his name. He found us after Mama died. Said we couldn't stay where we were. Said nobody wanted us there." Rhett's jaw tightened. "Where's this man now?" Mara's voice dropped to a whisper. "He left us. When the storm came. He said we were nobody's kids. Said we were more trouble than we were worth." She finally looked up, her eyes meeting Rhett's. "He said nobody would come looking." The words hit Rhett like a punch to the gut. He knew what it felt like to be nobody. To be left behind. To be told you didn't matter. He'd survived it. Barely. But these children, they were too small, too young. They shouldn't have to carry that weight. "You're somebody's now," Rhett said, his voice rough. "Long as you're under this roof, you're somebody's." Mara stared at him for a long moment. Then she looked back down at Jonah and kept feeding him, piece by careful piece. But Rhett saw it, the smallest flicker of something in her expression. Not trust. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of hope. The nights were the hardest. Rhett gave Mara and Jonah his bed, piling it high with every blanket he owned. He took the floor near the fire, his rifle within arm's reach. Old habit. The kind that kept a man breathing in uncertain times. But even with the fire crackling and the door barred, Mara couldn't sleep. Rhett heard her shifting in the darkness, heard the quick catch of her breath when the wind picked up outside. Sometimes she whispered to Jonah, soft, soothing sounds meant to calm a baby who couldn't understand why the world had turned so cold. On the fourth night, Rhett woke to find her standing at the window, small hands pressed against the glass, staring out into the black. "What are you looking for?" he asked quietly. She didn't turn around. "Making sure he's not coming back." "The man who left you." Mara nodded. Rhett sat up, rubbing his face. "He's long gone. Cowards like that don't come back. You don't know him." Her voice was barely audible. He doesn't like losing things. Something in the way she said it made Rhett's blood run cold. Things, he repeated carefully. Mara's reflection in the glass was pale and hollow. That's what he called us. His things. Said he paid for us. Said we owed him. Rhett stood slowly, crossing the room until he was beside her. He looked out into the darkness, seeing nothing but snow and shadow. Nobody owns you, he said firmly. Not him. Not anyone. Mara finally looked up at him. He said if we ran, he'd find us. He said nobody would believe us anyway. I believe you. The words hung in the air between them. Mara's eyes searched his face, looking for the lie, the crack, the moment when he'd change his mind like everyone else had. But Rhett didn't look away. Get some sleep, he said gently. I'll keep watch. She hesitated, then moved back toward the bed. But Rhett noticed she didn't close her eyes for a long time after. The next day brought a break in the weather. Pale sunlight filtered through the clouds, turning the snow into blinding white. Rhett took the opportunity to check the fence line and bring in more firewood. Mara stayed inside with Jonah, watching through the window as Rhett worked. When he came back in, stomping snow from his boots, she was sitting at the table with something in her hands. A small wooden horse, crudely carved. She'd found it on the shelf, one of the few things Rhett had kept from before. My brother made that, Rhett said, setting down the firewood. Long time ago. Mara ran her finger along the rough edges. Where is he now? Dead. The word came out flat. Final. Mara set the horse down carefully. I'm sorry. Rhett shrugged. Life out here doesn't promise much. You learn that quickly. He moved to the stove, starting coffee. Mara watched him in silence for a moment. Why'd you help us? She asked suddenly. Rhett paused, his hand on the pot. It was a fair question. He'd been asking himself the same thing. Because nobody helped me when I needed it, he said finally. And I remember what that felt like. Mara absorbed this, her expression unreadable. That evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows grew long across the snow, Rhett stepped outside to bring the horses into the barn. That's when he saw them. Tracks. Fresh ones. Leading from the tree line, circling the barn, then disappearing back into the woods. Boot prints. 2 sets, maybe 3. Someone had been here. Watching. Waiting. Rhett's hand moved to the revolver at his hip. He scanned the darkening tree line, but saw nothing. No movement. No sound except the wind. But the tracks were there. Clear as day. When he came back inside, Mara looked up from where she sat with Jonah. She saw something in Rhett's face, something hard and alert. What's wrong? She whispered. Rhett locked the door behind him. Checked the windows. Pulled the rifle down from above the mantel. Nothing you need to worry about, he said. But she knew he was lying. Rhett didn't sleep that night. He sat in a chair by the door, rifle across his lap, watching the windows. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind made his finger drift toward the trigger. The lamp burned low on the table, casting long shadows across the walls. Mara was awake too. He could tell by the way her breathing never settled into the deep rhythm of sleep. She lay in the bed with Jonah tucked against her, eyes open in the darkness, waiting for something terrible to arrive. They were both right to wait. At dawn, Rhett stepped outside into the brittle cold. The tracks from the night before were still there, frozen into the snow. He followed them to the edge of the property, where they disappeared into the thick stand of pines. Whoever had come wasn't trying to hide. They wanted him to know they'd been there. It was a message. Rhett stood at the tree line for a long moment, breath steaming in the frozen air. He'd dealt with rustlers before, drifters looking for easy targets. But this felt different. This felt personal. He went back inside and found Mara at the window, Jonah balanced on her hip. "We need to leave," she said quietly. "Before they come back." "No." She turned to face him, eyes wide. "You don't understand. They won't stop. They never stop. Then we make them stop. You can't." Her voice cracked. "You're just one person. There's more of them. And she stopped, swallowing hard. "They don't care who gets hurt." Rhett set the rifle down and crossed to her. He knelt so they were eye level. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "I've run before. Spent years running from things I couldn't face. And you know what? It doesn't work. They just follow. Or someone else comes along to take their place. So what do? We stand." Mara looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "We'll die. Maybe." Rhett straightened. "But at least we'll die knowing we didn't give up." He saw the fear in her eyes, deep and primal. But underneath it, something else flickered. Something that looked almost like defiance. The day passed in tense silence. Rhett reinforced the door, checked every window latch, and positioned supplies within easy reach. He taught Mara where to hide if things went bad, a space beneath the floorboards near the back wall, big enough for her and Jonah. "You stay there no matter what you hear," he told her. "You don't come out until I say it's safe." She nodded, face pale but determined. As afternoon bled into evening, Rhett spotted them. Two riders approached from the south, moving slowly and deliberately across the snow. They stopped just beyond rifle range, silhouettes against the dying light. Rhett stepped onto the porch, shotgun in hand. The riders sat motionless for a long moment. Then one of them raised his arm, a wave, almost friendly. They dismounted and started walking toward the cabin. Rhett's grip tightened on the shotgun. They stopped at the edge of the yard. The taller one wore a long coat dark with trail dust. The other was shorter, stockier, with a face that might have been handsome once but had gone hard with meanness. "Evening," the tall one called out. His voice was smooth, practiced. "Sorry to disturb you. We're looking for something that belongs to us." "Nothing here belongs to you," Rhett said evenly. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I think you know that's not true. We're missing 2 children. A girl and a baby. Someone said they might have ended up here." Behind Rhett, inside the cabin, he heard the faint sound of Mara's breathing stop. "Don't know what you're talking about," Rhett said. The shorter man spat into the snow. "Don't play stupid. We tracked them here. We know they're inside." "Even if they were," Rhett said, his voice dropping to something cold and dangerous, "they're not going anywhere with you." The tall man's smile faded. "That's not your decision to make. It is now." The tension stretched thin as wire. The tall man took one step forward. Rhett raised the shotgun and fired into the snow at their feet. The blast echoed across the empty plains. Both men stumbled backward, hands flying to their guns. "Next one's not a warning," Rhett said. The 2 men froze, hands hovering near their holsters. For a long, breathless moment, nobody moved. The echo of the gunshot faded into the wind, leaving only silence and the metallic click of Rhett chambering another round. The tall man raised his hands slowly, that false smile returning to his face. "Easy now," he said. "No need for violence. We're reasonable men. Then get off my property." The shorter man's face twisted with anger. "You got no right." "I got every right," Rhett cut him off. "This is my land. Those are my bullets. And you're trespassing." The tall man placed a hand on his partner's shoulder, silencing him. His eyes never left Rhett's face, calculating, measuring. "We'll leave," he said smoothly. "For now. But this isn't over. Those children are contracted property. We have papers. Papers don't mean a damn thing when you dump kids in a blizzard." Something flickered across the man's face, surprise, maybe, that Rhett knew. Then it hardened into something ugly. "You don't know what you're getting into," he said quietly. "This is bigger than you. Smarter men than you have learned not to interfere. I've been threatened by better men than you." The tall man's jaw clenched. He took a step back, then another, his partner following reluctantly. "We'll be back," he called over his shoulder. "With the law if we have to. Those children belong to us, and we're taking them back." "Try it," Rhett said. "See what happens." They mounted their horses, wheeling them around. But before they rode off, the tall man turned one last time. "You're making a mistake you won't live long enough to regret." Then they were gone, disappearing into the gathering dusk. Rhett stood on the porch long after they'd vanished, shotgun still raised, watching the empty horizon. His heart hammered against his ribs, adrenaline singing through his veins. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. Mara stood in the doorway, Jonah clutched tight in her arms. Her face was bone white. "That was him," she whispered. "The tall one. That was the man who took us." Rhett lowered the shotgun slowly. "He's gone now. He'll come back." Her voice shook. "He always comes back. And next time." She couldn't finish the sentence. Rhett stepped inside and barred the door behind him. He set the shotgun within easy reach and turned to face her. "Next time, I'll be ready. You don't understand." Tears streamed down Mara's face now. "He's not alone. There's more of them. They take children from everywhere, orphanages, streets, families that can't afford to keep them. They say they're finding them homes, but they're not. They use them. Work them. Sell them." The words hit Rhett like stones. He'd heard rumors of such things, operations that traded in human lives, especially children. But hearing it from Mara, seeing the terror in her eyes, made it real in a way that turned his stomach. "How many others?" he asked quietly. "I don't know. Dozens, maybe. We were kept in a basement in Kansas City before they moved us. Jonah and me, we were supposed to go to a mining camp. But the storm came and..." She trailed off, shaking. Rhett crossed to her and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're not going to any mining camp," he said firmly. "And you're not going back to any basement. I don't care how many of them there are. But how? Let me worry about that." Mara looked up at him, searching his face for certainty, for strength, for something to believe in. Rhett wished he felt as confident as he sounded. That night, he barely closed his eyes. He moved through the cabin like a ghost, checking locks, watching windows, listening for the sound of approaching horses. The lamp stayed low. The fire burned steadily. And somewhere in the darkness beyond his walls, Rhett knew they were out there. Watching. Waiting. Planning their return. He checked his ammunition. Counted his rounds. It wouldn't be enough if they came in numbers. But it would have to be. Because Rhett Carver had made his choice. And he wasn't backing down. 3 days passed like a held breath. Rhett moved through the ranch with constant vigilance, his rifle never far from reach. He reinforced the cabin door with additional bracing, nailed shutters over the windows that could be closed quickly, and positioned spare weapons at strategic points throughout the room. Mara watched him prepare with silent understanding. She'd stopped asking if they were safe. She knew better. During the day, Rhett tried to maintain some sense of normalcy. He showed Mara how to feed the horses, taught her which logs burned best in the stove. Jonah had started toddling around the cabin, his small hands grabbing onto furniture, his laughter a strange and fragile sound against the weight of waiting. But normalcy was an illusion, and they all knew it. At night, the cabin became a fortress. Rhett kept watch in shifts, allowing himself only brief moments of sleep. Mara would sit by the fire with Jonah, humming songs her mother had taught her, soft, sad melodies that drifted through the darkness like prayers. On the fourth night, the temperature dropped hard. The kind of cold that made the cabin walls crack and groan, that froze water in the basin before morning. Rhett was checking the back window when he saw it. Movement in the tree line. Not one shadow. Several. His blood went ice cold. "Mara," he said quietly, not turning from the window. "Take Jonah. Get under the floor. Now." She was on her feet instantly, scooping up the baby. "How many?" "Enough." Her face went pale, but she didn't hesitate. She moved to the loose floorboard near the back wall, prying it up with shaking hands. The space beneath was cramped and dark, barely big enough for both children. "Remember what I said," Rhett told her as she climbed down with Jonah. "No matter what you hear. You stay hidden." "What if?" "No matter what." Mara nodded, tears streaming down her face. Then she pulled the board back over her head, disappearing into the darkness below. Rhett stood alone in the cabin now, heart pounding, hands steady on his rifle. He extinguished the lamps one by one, plunging the room into shadow. Only the fire remained, casting flickering orange light across the walls. Then he waited. The first sound came from the barn, the sharp crack of wood breaking. They were testing his response, seeing if he'd come out. Rhett stayed put. The second sound was closer. Footsteps crunching through snow, circling the cabin. Slow and deliberate. They weren't hiding anymore. Rhett moved to the window, peering through a gap in the shutter. 4 men. Maybe 5. It was hard to tell in the darkness. The tall man from before stood at the front, his face illuminated by the moonlight reflecting off snow. "Carver," he called out. "We don't want trouble. Just send the children out and we'll leave peacefully." Rhett didn't respond. "You're alone in there," the man continued. "We're offering you a chance to walk away from this. Take it." Still nothing. The man's voice hardened. "Have it your way." Rhett heard the whisper of steel, guns being drawn, hammers being cocked. Then came the sound he'd been dreading. The back door. Someone was working on the lock. Rhett spun, rifle raised, moving silently across the cabin. He positioned himself behind the heavy wooden table, using it as cover, and aimed at the door. The lock rattled. Once. Twice. Then it gave way with a sharp crack. The door swung open. A figure stepped through, the shorter man from before, gun drawn, eyes scanning the darkness. He took 2 steps inside. Rhett didn't give him a third. The rifle shot was deafening in the enclosed space, the muzzle flash lighting up the cabin like lightning. The man went down hard, clutching his leg, screaming. And then all hell broke loose. The front door exploded inward, wood splintering as 2 more men crashed through. Rhett swung the rifle around, firing, the sound hammering against his ears. 1 man dropped. The other dove behind the overturned chair. Rhett didn't have time to reload. He dropped the rifle and grabbed the fire iron from the hearth, his breath coming hard and fast. The cabin filled with smoke and chaos and the sound of men shouting. And beneath the floorboards, hidden in darkness, Mara held Jonah tight and prayed. The man behind the chair lunged. Rhett swung the fire iron hard, connecting with the man's shoulder. Bone cracked. The man howled and stumbled sideways, his gun clattering to the floor. Another figure filled the doorway, the tall man, pistol raised. Rhett dove behind the table as the shot rang out, wood exploding where his head had been a heartbeat before. He rolled, grabbed a fallen revolver, and fired blind over the table's edge. The tall man ducked back outside, cursing. Rhett's ears rang. His hands were slick with sweat despite the cold. The cabin was a disaster of overturned furniture, broken glass, and blood. 2 men lay groaning on the floor. But more were coming. He heard boots on the porch, heavy, deliberate. They were regrouping. Rhett scrambled for his rifle, fingers finding it in the chaos. He checked the chamber. 1 round left. He'd need to make it count. The tall man's voice cut through the night. "You're finished, Carver. Give up now and maybe you will walk away from this." Rhett pressed his back against the wall beside the shattered door, breathing hard. His ribs ached. Blood ran from a cut above his eye, blurring his vision. Beneath the floor, he could hear Jonah crying, soft, terrified whimpers that cut through the chaos. The men outside heard it too. "The children are still here," one of them said, voice hungry with triumph. "We got 'em." Something primal ignited in Rhett's chest. A fury he hadn't felt since the war, since watching men he cared about die while he survived. Not again. Not these children. He grabbed the remaining kerosene lamp and hurled it through the broken window. It shattered against the porch, flames erupting across the wooden boards. Men shouted, scrambling back from the sudden blaze. In the confusion, Rhett moved. He burst through the door, rifle raised, and fired his last round into the nearest man's chest. The man dropped like a stone. The tall man spun toward him, pistol coming up. Rhett was faster. He swung the empty rifle like a club, catching the man across the jaw. The tall man's head snapped back, blood spraying from his mouth. His pistol fired wild, the bullet singing past Rhett's ear. They went down together, crashing into the snow, fists and elbows and desperation. The tall man was younger, faster, but Rhett fought with the fury of a man protecting something that mattered more than his own life. He drove his fist into the man's ribs once, twice, 3 times. I felt something gave. The man gasped, tried to bring his gun around, but Rhett caught his wrist and slammed it against the frozen ground until the weapon fell from nerveless fingers. "You should have left them alone," Rhett growled, his hand closing around the man's throat. The tall man's eyes went wide with genuine fear. Then hoofbeats thundered across the snow. Rhett's head snapped up. A rider appeared through the darkness, multiple riders. 4 of them, moving fast. Rhett's heart sank. More of them. He couldn't fight them all. But then a voice rang out, clear and commanding. "Drop your weapons. Now." A star glinted on the lead rider's chest. The sheriff. Relief flooded through Rhett so suddenly his arms went weak. He released the tall man, who gasped and rolled away, clutching his throat. The sheriff and his deputies surrounded the cabin, guns drawn. They rounded up the injured men, dragging them away from the burning porch. One deputy threw snow on the flames, containing the fire before it could spread. The sheriff dismounted and approached Rhett, who was still kneeling in the snow, breathing hard. "Got your message," the sheriff said, helping him to his feet. "Sorry it took us so long to get here." Rhett had sent word 2 days ago, after the first confrontation. He'd hoped the law would arrive before things turned violent. He'd hoped wrong. But they were here now. The sheriff looked at the chaos, the broken door, the injured men, the blood in the snow. "Looks like you held your own," he said quietly. Rhett didn't answer. He stumbled back toward the cabin, legs shaking with exhaustion and fading adrenaline. Inside, he crossed to the hidden space beneath the floor and pulled back the board. Mara looked up at him, face streaked with tears, Jonah clutched tight in her arms. "Is it over?" she whispered. Rhett reached down and lifted them both out, holding them close as they trembled against him. "It's over," he said. The sheriff took statements by lamplight while his deputies loaded the men into a wagon. The tall man sat in handcuffs, his face swollen and bloody, glaring at Rhett with pure hatred. But there was fear there too now. The fear of a man who'd finally met someone who wouldn't break. "These men won't be bothering you again," the sheriff said, closing his notebook. "We've been tracking this operation for months. With your testimony and the girls, we'll have enough to shut them down for good." Mara stood close to Rhett, one hand gripping his coat. She watched the men being taken away, her expression hard to read, relief mixed with something darker, something that would take years to heal. "What about the other children?" she asked quietly. "The ones still with them?" The sheriff's face softened. "We'll find them. I promise you that." As the wagon rolled away into the night, taking the last of the men with it, Rhett felt something inside him finally ease. The tension that had coiled tight in his chest for days began to unwind. The sheriff mounted his horse, tipping his hat. "You did good here, Carver. Not many men would have stood against those odds." Rhett nodded, too tired for words. When the riders disappeared into the darkness, the ranch fell silent except for the wind and a crackle of dying embers from the porch fire. Rhett stood in the doorway, looking at his cabin, broken, blood-stained, but still standing. Mara tugged on his sleeve. "What happens now?" "Now we fix what's broken," Rhett said. "And we keep going." The next morning, Rhett rode into town. He found the county clerk and filed papers for legal guardianship. The clerk looked over the documents, then at Rhett's battered face, and asked no questions. "They'll be legally yours within the week," the clerk said. "Assuming no one contests it." "They won't," Rhett replied. The weeks that followed were slow and careful. Mara still jumped at sudden noises. She still watched the door, still expecting something terrible to arrive. But gradually, day by day, the fear in her eyes began to fade. Rhett taught her to ride. Started with the gentle buckskin pony that had once belonged to his brother. She fell off twice before she found her balance, but she climbed back on each time without being asked. Jonah grew bolder too. He toddled after Rhett everywhere, to the barn, to the creek, across the yard. His laughter filled spaces that had been silent for years. The cabin filled with life. Small boots by the door. Toys carved from wood scraps. The smell of bread baking. Voices at the dinner table instead of silence. Rhett found himself smiling more. Sleeping better. The weight he'd carried for so long, the loneliness, the guilt, the sense that he was meant to be alone, began to lift. Winter gave way to spring. The snow melted. Green pushed up through the thawing ground. And the ranch, once a lonely stretch of land marked only by isolation, became something else entirely. One morning in early April, Rhett stood at the entrance to his property with a newly carved sign in his hands. He'd worked on it for weeks, planing the wood smooth, burning the letters deep. Carver Family Ranch. He hung it from the gate posts and stepped back to look at it. Behind him, he heard small footsteps in the grass. Mara appeared at his side, her hair loose and catching the sunlight. She looked up at the sign, then slipped her small hand into his. "What are we now?" she asked softly. Rhett looked down at her, this brave girl who'd survived abandonment, cold, and cruelty. Who'd protected her brother with everything she had. Who was learning, slowly, to trust again. He squeezed her hand gently. "You're home," he said. "For good." Mara's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "For good." "For good," Rhett confirmed. She leaned against his side, and together they stood there in the spring sunshine, watching Jonah chase butterflies through the grass. The wind carried the smell of wildflowers and fresh earth. Somewhere in the distance, horses whinnied. The world felt wide and open and full of possibility. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Rhett Carver felt something he'd thought was lost forever. He felt like he belonged. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments below. And if you'd like to hear more stories from the Wild West about courage, family, and second chances, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss one. Thanks for listening.